first, if you can introduce your page and what it's all about.
Yeah. So I have this page called Free Brian Wilson, and it's essentially advocating for the liberation of Brian from whichever powers that be surrounding him, and how I see a lot of very concerning similarities with the situation right now and what went on infamously in the 80s and late 70s with Dr. Eugene Landy. And I feel like he doesn't have a lot of application at the moment. So I'm trying to spearhead that whole movement.
How long have you been a fan, and what was the first show you saw?
Oh man, so I've been a fan since as long as I can remember, and as early as preschool, my holy trinity was the Beatles, the Beach Boys, Mamas and the Papas, all that good stuff in the 60s. But as I got a little older into elementary school age, middle school age, I started really poring over the biographies of the people who I idolized. And as soon as I got on my binge of how awesome Brian is in the production and his songwriting, just ingeniousness, I kind of got obsessed with him in particular. So yeah, it's been a thing for as long as I can remember, as far as me being a fan of the Beach Boys and Brian.
And when did you see the first Brian solo show?
Well, that was back in 2018. I have kind of a little backstory about that whole ordeal, because it kind of what got me started on this whole mode of thinking with Brian. So my original concert date was supposed to be in May of 2018, but a couple of weeks to maybe a month before the concert, I got a little email that said that he was dealing with some emergency medical issues. So that got postponed. Luckily, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because when the concert was rescheduled, I got the meet and greet, I got the book signing, I got the sound check. So I got the whole 9 yards of that one. And yeah, that whole concert experience was definitely pivotal to how I think now, essentially. Well, I suppose I'll elaborate on it. So I was so excited. I bought these tickets. It was 2 hours away from where I lived, and I would make that drive 5 times over to go see Brian. But I got there, and off the bat, since I knew Brian's backstory pretty well, I was pretty, I knew that he didn't like meeting people that much. He wasn't the best with people. He had some anxieties with, pertaining to meeting others. So I didn't expect him to be bubbly and, really charismatic and everything else, but he really looked like he was being held at gunpoint. Like it felt like, okay, he doesn't want to be meeting me right now, which is fine. So I was respectful, and I, just said hi and bye, basically got my picture, and didn't harass him too much, because yeah, as I said, I kind of knew that he wasn't the biggest fan of that. But yeah, so once the concert started, he was wheeled on stage, and I was like, okay, that doesn't seem too right. But maybe he's old, right? So he could have just been having trouble walking or back pain, which he has historically struggled with. But man, that concert, he didn't sing a single song by himself. Like the only song I recall him actually singing all the way through was Just Wasn't Made for These Times. And even so, he was exasperated, he was breathless, he was forgetting the words. And yeah, the other songs, he just kind of sat there idly. He sat there kind of blank at the piano. And whenever he would forget the words or stop singing, someone else who was younger, or Al, would take over and start singing for him. But it was the weirdest thing, because I felt so grateful, and it was awesome to be able to see him, but I felt very guilty just seeing what I saw there. So that's really what did it for me. And if he can't get through his own songs, if he can't remember the lyrics to his own songs, I was thinking to myself, like, who am I even seeing right now? Like, should he be here? Should I be here? So yeah, that's really what did it for me, was that one and only concert, because I can never financially enable what I saw that day again. I would love to see him if he were well and wanting to, but I can't. It's not right.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I had a similar experience. I mean, I've been seeing him since 2006 was the first time. Actually, I wore the shirt
Wow.
to the first shirt I ever
love
got.
that.
Yeah, Pet Sounds 40th.
That's
So
awesome.
it was a good show. Even then it was rough, and that was what 15 years ago
Yeah.
or whatever. So I had a
Mhm.
similar experience as you in 2016, which was 10 years after the first time I saw him. And I went with my wife, and we were
Mhm.
like, uh, it was just rough. And I was like, this is like, I think I'm good on this. You know, I
Mhm.
think I've seen him enough.
Exactly.
So I totally
Yeah.
get what you're saying. So I guess on that note, what has the reaction been like? I mean, as far as on message boards or anyone you've talked to in person, or as far as messages you get to your Instagram page.
Yeah. So it's the people who support what I say are very vehement in their support. Like they're, people who feel as passionate about as me obviously reciprocate that in the feedback that I get. But there are a lot of fan accounts on Instagram, a lot of Beach Boys fans who kind of rebuttal by saying, "Oh well, he's old. How would you do on stage at that age? How would you?" And it's crazy because yeah, he that's the exact point. If I'm at that age in that mental state in that physical state, you're right. I wouldn't be doing well because I shouldn't be doing well at that in that kind of state. So it's been a very mixed reaction. I think that maybe I have a bias because people who follow me obviously, support what I'm doing with this, but the people who don't, the reactions are usually the same, and they'll call me ableist. They'll call me ageist. That well, wow, you don't think that someone at his age can be a successful performer, and that's not it at all. Like I love Brian so much. Like he's all I've ever known as far as music. Like I would do anything to hype him up and get the word out about how great he is. But it's sad to see, so I'm just kind of trying to rebuttal with the same kind of response with, well, yeah, if he's at that age he probably shouldn't be doing this if he's not able to. So yeah, that's kind of the response I've been getting.
I don't know. That's a tough
Yeah.
storm to weather because they can be very enthusiastic, like a very almost like zealots, very overzealous
Right.
crowd. So um,
Yeah, no, I've encountered that for sure. People who pull their own age card, pull their own, oh, I was there when XYZ happened. And it's, yeah, I validate your experience here, but I'm just looking from an outsider's perspective, as we all are, trying to see how can we help this man who is visibly, conspicuously not happy with the situation. So yeah.
yeah. And it probably takes a certain perspective too, like someone who's been following him since 1987, or I don't know, since the 70s or whatever, isn't going to see his state and what he's doing now the same way that someone who saw him in 2018 would. I feel like they might
Exactly.
be tainted by their experience.
No, that's exactly right, and it's hard to combat that, but we have to also recognize that publicity, PR, social awareness, mental health awareness was entirely different back then. So I just want people to acknowledge that, yeah, I'm sure that he looked fine back then, and he looked fine when you saw him, but we have to acknowledge at this point that this is a historically mentally ill man who's been taken advantage of. So we have to look out for him as fans.
What do you think makes people reluctant to understand this side or to accept it? Is it because there are other old rock stars or old musicians or performers who are also doing this, or is it because they think, I mean, do they think he's different in some way?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that we see people like Billy Joel and Elton John and Michael McDonald who are still touring at relatively older ages, and they're doing fine. And even those, a couple of those who I just listed have historical struggles of mental illness, but at the same time, they don't have historical issues with people taking advantage and capitalizing upon their mental illness. So I think we have to maybe stress the point that we have to put it into a perspective to where, yes, there are people who can do this and who have done it and who are doing it well and who are doing it fine, and they're doing great and they enjoy it. But when we take it into account for Brian Wilson, like he's never liked touring. There are verified quotes left and right of Brian saying, yeah, touring really broke me type thing. So I think that even though there are people who can do it, that doesn't mean that everybody can do it. I think that people have to put it into more individualistic perspective to really see the truth here.
Right. And I guess that kind of leads me to my question of why, well, I mean, I've asked why you think the pushback toward your side, but why do you think he's even doing it? Why do you think he's still going on when he very clearly seems like he doesn't want to?
Right. Yeah. And so a lot of everything that I'm saying is backed in facts and quotes and things that can be verified. But I will go as far as to say that I think that logical consistency is very important. And I think that if you have a history of, for example, when he was with Landy, you think that Brian was saying, oh yeah, I really hate this. I really hate what's going on here. No, like he's historically been over medicated, historically been taken advantage of by people who are surrounding him and above him. So I think that people must acknowledge that. Like that, I think that's the biggest thing. Like there are so many quotes of people who have commented on the situation that he's in now, who have no incentive to do so, no incentive to dissent, no incentive to stir the pot, and so I think that people must recognize that, it's a historic issue with him. Like it's a historic issue that he runs into because he's so brilliant, and unfortunately brilliance comes with mental health caveats a lot of the time. So I think that's a big issue that people must recognize, even though it's hard to.
Yeah, and I mean the famous quote that comes to mind would be from Carney Wilson, his daughter, who said that I think, what did he call Melinda? Melandy? I mean, and this was
Mhm.
that's a long time ago, probably. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's, if I recall correctly, I think that was from like maybe 91, in the 90s at least. There is this piece that Paul Lester wrote, and it was a biography made about Brian Wilson where he quoted Carney as saying this about the Melandy comment. So even though I believe that quote happened, and it's documented by many people, I'll go as far as to mention actual documented quotes, for firsthand sources. So Ginger Blake, who was Marilyn and Diane's sister, Marilyn Wilson's sister, Brian's ex-wife, she said they were in the band together, the Honeys that Brian produced for and backed back in the day. And she said that, that Brian's complacent and basically surrendered. And that's a quote from how he's acting today. And even if we can, because for example, I'll preface by saying that the reason why people kind of discount the Melandy quote is because it's not the easiest to track down exactly when and where it happened. But even given our gripe, the popular gripe with Mike Love, that the lawsuit, everything that happened with Mike, we can't ignore the fact that Mike is Brian's cousin, and Mike was very close to Brian. And even Mike said, and this is a direct quote, Brian usually has someone in his life who tells him what to do. And now that person kind of wants to keep him away from us. I don't know why. You'd have to ask her, I guess. So, even though we have dubious claims about Mike and his relationship with Brian, we can't ignore the fact that is a primary source close to Brian.
It's also a tough thing because sometimes it is doing what you don't want to do that's best for you, right? And there are personalities like that. I know that I'm that way. If it's like, if left to my own devices, I'll do I don't know, I'll piss the day away, or I'll waste time, or I'll do self-destructive things, or it won't be productive, whatever. And I think a lot of people are like that. And sometimes we do find that like we're better because we met someone came into our lives who pushed us to do things, or we took the bull by the horns and kind of pushed ourselves to do things we don't want to do. So there's a fine line, because that can be a good thing for people. And then there's also the side where it's too much against your will.
Right. And I think that, like you said, you're doing things, you're actively on your own volition doing something. Like, and I think that the biggest thing here is that Brian isn't doing anything. Like, he's
Mhm.
not singing on stage. He's not, for example, if I can kind of go a little off tangent and say that the biggest thing that's really getting me is that what Brian does, what his actions have been his entire life, is writing music, producing music, and he's not doing that anymore. He's not doing anything. Like, if I can bring up No Peer Pressure, not a single song on that entire album is Brian doing anything on his own that's credited. So yeah, not a single track on that entire album did Brian write or solely write or produce anything. We have people like Casey Musgraves, Nate Russ, and they have multiple songwriting credits. Everything's written by Brian and Joe Thomas. So there's not a single just Brian track on there. And I would agree with you. Like, if Brian was at least doing something, if he was at least on his own volition, on his own accord, actually producing and writing things, I would say, yeah, at least he's doing something. At least someone's pushing him to do things that will distract him from his mental state. But he's not. Like, he's prolific. Obviously, he's a prolific songwriter and producer. Never once has he delegated responsibilities to people like that, and he's simply not doing anything. And same with his piano album. Nothing's going on there. He's not doing much at all.
Yeah. That's a weird one. I mean, this is one of the first times I've felt like I'm clearly not closely following him anymore, because I just saw the ads for the piano album and I was like, oh, I don't want that.
No. Good call. Good call.
But no, you're right. And that's something that's easy to forget when we think of mental health. And sometimes it's good to be pushed to do things, but you have to have some interest.
Yeah, no, I'm a big advocate of mental health, and kind of, when you're in a bad place, doing what you love and helping yourself get back to where you want to be as far as finding your passion and stuff again. But it's just glaringly obvious that there's nothing being done for him, nothing being done by him. Like, as we all know, Brian is a great songwriter and producer, but if you listen to his demos, listen to his live piano performances, he's not a pianist. He's never been a pianist. He's a genius on chords. He's a genius with chord progressions. He's obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here, but he's obviously a genius when it comes to coming up with innovative chords. But never once have I ever heard him on any demo, any performance, like, being wow at the keys. Like, he played Gershwin one time live, even with his icon of a composer, George Gershwin. He couldn't play it well, and that's fine because he's not a pianist. So unless Brian like suddenly went on a whim and like got classically trained in piano, I don't know how anyone can attribute his piano performances on his piano album to him. I just really don't think that Brian's doing anything at all.
Yeah. And you know what? I always liked that about him, that he wasn't some, incredible virtuoso pianist,
Exactly.
Do you think he has it in him to write songs or write an album these days?
God, as much as I wish that I could say yes, because he's so brilliant. I love him more than anybody on the planet when it comes to music, and just being an inspiration to people everywhere, whether you're a musician or not, whether you want to write music. It just, his power to prevail over his inner demons, his mental health struggles, that's so inspirational. But unfortunately, I feel like between the damage that was done to him by Eugene Landy and the horribly suffocating situation that I think he's in now, I don't think he does. I wish that he did, but all I want him to be able to do now is finally rest. He's pushing 80. He hasn't written anything on his own in decades. So I want to say yes, but I don't think so. And I don't think that he should try. Like, I think that he just needs to rest finally.
That's fair. And I guess it's a little contentious question. You tell me how you feel, but do you attribute this like singularly to Melinda, or do you think it's like a group of people behind him who are just kind of, as they see it, running a business? Or what do you think the source of like the pressure is to keep going?
I would think the latter would be the most fair to say. I'm not going to sit here and say that, Melinda is this single-handed, horrible, evil monster. I don't think it's that at all. I do think there's a very large hand in it because she would be the beneficiary of any actions that come from his work at this point. But I don't think that she's doing it on her own. I think that when you're managing someone like Brian Wilson, like he has, like, what a name he has, what a name he has to profit off of, what a name he has to do all these things off of. And it's it's hard because it's obvious that there are people who are pushing these tours, pushing these very illegitimate albums, pushing everything that's going on with him. And it's not just her. I think that it is her plus a group of people around him who just want money off of this genius who needs help.
Let's see. Going on, I know I have a couple more. This is a big one. What's the long-term plan, goal? If things go the way you want, what happens from the attention that this movement receives?
Well, I mean, I guess my biggest goal is, first of all, awareness, because I feel like a lot of people would love to tell themselves that by going to spend their money on seeing Brian Wilson, that they're, seeing their icon, that he loves doing it, that he's just over the moon with promoting his works of genius. And as much as I'd love for that to be true, I don't think it is. So I think that just spreading the narrative, spreading the awareness with, maybe we should look a little bit closer to see how Brian's actually doing. And if personally, obviously, I think that I'm correct in my mode of thinking, but if it's proven that I am correct, I would love for him just to be able to rest. I want him to be able to have solace at last, whether it was by the hands of his father, by the hands of Eugene Landy, and questionably at the hands of Melinda and those who surround him right now. I just want him to be free from the grips of the capitalizing hands around him.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I meant to ask this a little earlier, but have you received any like pushback from official channels or management, and do you expect to?
Well, I had a source who has requested that certain things be taken down that I've posted. So I've gotten indirect pushback and just pushback from copyright strikes and stuff like that. But if the movement gains the traction that I want it to gain, I think that I probably will get some pushback, which is kind of why I didn't show my face, because I want to remain as anonymous as possible just in case that happens. Mm-hmm. And I'm not afraid though. Like I'm not afraid at all. All I want to do is to help this man who I don't even know but love so much just gain some sense of solace. So I'm not afraid. I probably will get some pushback, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't care.
Fair enough. What's your favorite Beach Boys album and Brian Wilson solo album?
Oh man.
I hate when people ask me this, so I totally get the hesitation.
It's gonna be okay. So my favorite Beach Boys album, I'll say Pet Sounds at first, but obviously, my favorite album that was released was the Smile Sessions. I loved hearing, for example, like the original form of Wonderful. I love the original Wonderful on the Smile Sessions. And as far as Brian Wilson's solo albums go, I almost want to categorize Love You as part of that, because it's supposed to be that, Brian Wilson loves you. And, but I like the direction that was going to take. So if I were to pick a favorite Brian Wilson solo album, it would be, I guess, Love You. Yeah.
I really love that. That's a great album. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Free Brian Wilson. And
thank you.
Talk to you next time.